Hi guys, and welcome to tonight's quiet corner of history. Before we begin, I want you to find your most comfortable position. Adjust your pillow, pull the covers up high, and let the weight of your body sink deeply into the bed. Tonight, we are going to travel back in time, far across the world and through the mist of centuries, to explore a story of gradual change. It is a story of a great empire, once solid and timeless as the mountains, and how a quiet, invisible force began to pull at its threads. We are going to speak about the Qing dynasty, about tea and silk, and the slow, somber arrival of opium. There is no rush tonight. The world outside can wait. For now, there is only the sound of my voice and the steady, rhythmic breath of history. Imagine, if you will, the vast landscape of China in the 18th century. It is a world of immense, quiet beauty, where the sun rises over jagged, emerald peaks and sets across gold-tinted plains. At this time, under the rule of the Qing emperors, China felt like the center of the universe, a place of profound order and ancient rhythm. Picture the morning mist clinging to the Yangtze River. The water is smooth, like a sheet of gray silk, disturbed only by the occasional, slow dip of a wooden oar as a small boat glides through the reeds. There is no engine noise, no frantic pace of modern life, there is only the soft lapping of water against the hull and the distant, melodic call of a crane rising from the marshland. In the villages, life follows the seasons with a patience that has lasted for thousands of years. You can see the farmers now, moving through the terraced rice paddies with a deliberate, steady gait. The mud is cool between their toes, and the air smells of wet earth and growing things. They work in harmony with the sun, planting when the rains come and harvesting when the stalks turn a dusty yellow. There is a profound sense of security here. The village is a closed circle, a family bound by tradition and the spirits of their ancestors. In the evenings, as the light turns to a soft purple, smoke rises lazily from stone chimneys, curling into the twilight sky. Families gather around low wooden tables, the steam from bowls of rice rising to meet the rafters. It is a life of simple, predictable peace. Further away, in the grand cities and administrative centers, the order is even more refined. Think of the scholars, sitting in quiet courtyards shaded by gnarled willow trees. The only sound is the scratch of a brush against paper, a soft, rhythmic shh as they transcribe the wisdom of Confucius or compose poetry about the moon. The ink is dark and fragrant, ground by hand on a stone slab. These men are the pillars of a society built on stability and merit. They believe in the permanence of their world. To them, the Qing Empire is a great wall of culture and tradition that nothing can breach. And then, there is the tea. Imagine the vast plantations covering the rolling hills of the south, row upon row of vibrant green bushes. Thousands of hands gently pluck the tender leaves, which are then dried and fired in large iron pans. The scent is everywhere, earthy, floral, and deeply comforting. This tea is the lifeblood of the empire's trade. Merchants travel along the Grand Canal, their barges laden with chests of tea, rolls of shimmering silk, and delicate porcelain that rings like a bell when tapped. China has everything the world desires, but it desires very little from the world in return. It is a self-contained garden, beautiful and proud. As the years drift by, like clouds passing over a high peak, we begin to see the first signs of the outside world pressing against the edges of this garden. Far to the south, in the port of Canton, the air is different. It is thicker, salter, and filled with the creak of massive wooden ships. These are the vessels of the ocean devils, the merchants from Great Britain and Europe who have sailed for months across treacherous seas. At first, they are a small, distant presence. The emperor in Beijing views them as nothing more than curious supplicants, eager to trade their silver for the treasures of the East. The British merchants, in their heavy wool coats and tricorn hats, stand on the docks, watching the endless flow of tea and silk leaving the port. They are frustrated. They have a voracious appetite for Chinese tea, it has become the favorite drink of the London elite and the working class alike, but the Chinese will accept nothing in payment except silver. The silver is flowing out of Europe and into the coffers of the Qing, creating a great imbalance. The British need something to sell, something the Chinese people will want as much as the British want their tea. For a long time, the trade remains professional and restrained. The foreigners are confined to a small strip of land outside the city walls. They are not allowed to enter the interior of the country, they are kept at a distance, like guests who are tolerated but not truly welcomed. The Qing officials are polite but firm. They do not see the British as equals, but as traders from a lesser, peripheral land. In the quiet halls of the Forbidden City, the emperor rests easy, believing his borders are secure and his people are content. He does not know that in the humid fields of Bengal, thousands of miles away, a new crop is being cultivated with intense focus. The British East India Company has begun to grow poppies. Beautiful, delicate flowers with petals like crumpled tissue paper, swaying in the breeze. From these flowers comes a dark, sticky resin. Opium. At first, it arrives in China in small quantities, often tucked away in the corners of cargo holds or traded quietly among sailors. It is used as a medicine, a way to dull the pain of a long day or to soothe a cough. It is a shadow in the corner of the room, barely noticeable, seemingly insignificant. But slowly, very slowly, the shadow begins to grow. The British realize that while the Chinese government forbids the import of opium for recreational use, there is a growing hunger for it. They begin to ship it more frequently, using fast, sleek boats that can navigate the coastal inlets. It isn't a sudden invasion, it's a gradual seepage, like water finding a crack in a dam. The trade moves from the docks to the backstreets, from the sailors to the local merchants, and eventually, into the pipes of the people. The pace of the story slows down now, as we watch the first tendrils of this change take hold. In the tea houses of the South, where men used to gather to talk of business or philosophy, a new scent begins to mingle with the aroma of roasted tea leaves. It is a sweet, heavy, cloying smell, the smell of burning opium. It hangs in the air, thick and still. Men lie back on wooden couches, their eyes half closed, as they take a long, slow draw from a bamboo pipe. The world around them softens. The pressures of their lives, the taxes, the family obligations, the heat of the day, all of it melts away into a hazy, golden dream. At first, it seems like a harmless escape. A merchant might use it once a week to relax. A laborer might use it to numb the ache in his back after carrying heavy loads at the docks. But opium is not like tea. It does not refresh, it consumes. As the months turn into years, those who touched it once begin to need it twice, then every day. The silver that once flowed into China for its silk and tea begins to flow back out, into the hands of the foreign traders, as the demand for the foreign mud becomes insatiable. A quiet unease begins to settle over the coastal provinces. The officials in the local yamen notice that their clerks are moving more slowly. The soldiers on the walls seem less alert, their eyes glassy in the afternoon sun. The vibrant, productive energy of the markets is subtly dampened. It's as if a soft, gray veil has been draped over the busy life of the port. The drums of the night watch still sound, the bells of the temples still ring, but the resonance feels different, thinner, more hollow. In the Forbidden City, the reports start to arrive. They speak of silver shortages and lazy populations. The emperor, sitting on his throne of carved dragonwood, reads these scrolls with a growing sense of confusion. How could a simple substance, brought by traders from the edge of the world, be causing such a disturbance? He issues edicts. He bans the trade. He threatens punishment. But the dragon is far away, and the opium is already in the blood of the people. The British ships sit anchored in the bays, their dark hulls reflecting in the moonlit water. They are patient. They know that the hunger they have cultivated is stronger than any imperial decree. The quiet peace of the Qing dynasty, that ancient, rhythmic heartbeat of the empire, is beginning to skip a beat. The villages are still there, the rice is still growing, and the scholars are still writing, but there is a new silence in the air, a heavy, expectant silence. It is the feeling of a storm that hasn't arrived yet, but the air has turned cold, and the birds have stopped singing. The silver is disappearing. The pipes are being lit. And the great, ancient garden of China is no longer alone in the dark. The world is coming for it, not with cannons yet, but with a sweet, deadly smoke that drifts through the streets like a ghost, looking for a place to rest. The ships sit low in the water, their massive hulls groaning softly against the tides of the Pearl River Delta. These are the great Indiamen, floating fortresses of the British East India Company, and within their dark, wooden bellies lies a cargo that carries no weight but holds a heavy destiny. They have come from the sun-drenched fields of Bengal, where the poppies were harvested in the heat of the day, their sap collected and dried into dark, dense cakes. To the sailors, it is merely a commodity, a way to balance the ledgers of an empire half a world away. But as the chests are lowered into smaller, swifter boats, they move through the coastal mists like shadows, slipping past the watchful eyes of the shore guards who are, perhaps, looking the other way. The spread of the foreign mud is not like a fire, it is like a rising tide in a quiet bay. It happens inch by inch, so slowly that the people standing on the shore hardly notice their feet are getting wet. Imagine a merchant in the city of Canton, a man who has spent his life trading in fine ceramics. He is a man of routine, starting his day with a walk through the morning markets where the air smells of ginger, star anise, and fresh scallions. But lately, he finds that the usual bustle feels a bit too loud, a bit too sharp. A friend, another merchant, invites him to a quiet room in the back of a shop. There are no windows here, only the soft, warm glow of a small oil lamp. His friend offers him a pipe, explaining that it is a way to find clarity, a way to let the stresses of the trade disappear into the wood smoke. As the merchant takes his first breath of the vapor, the world does not change suddenly. Instead, it softens. The sharp edges of his worries about taxes and shipments begin to blur, like ink running on damp paper. The room feels warmer, the silence deeper. He feels as though he is floating on a calm, internal sea. When he leaves, the evening air feels cool and wonderful against his skin, and he thinks to himself that he has found a secret peace. He does not know that he has just planted a seed that will slowly grow to consume his days. He goes home, sleeps soundly, and wakes the next morning believing everything is exactly as it was. In the shipyards and on the docks, the change is even more subtle. Picture a laborer, a man whose muscles have been hardened by decades of carrying heavy crates of tea. His joints ache in the damp river air, and his back feels like a bow pulled too tight. For him, opium is not a luxury, it is a reprieve. He finds a small stall tucked between two warehouses where the smoke is cheap. For a few copper coins, he can buy an hour of weightlessness. In that hour, his pain vanishes. He is no longer a tired man in a crowded city, he is a king in a kingdom of silk and clouds. But as the weeks pass, the coins he should be taking home to his family begin to find their way more frequently to the small stall. The hunger of his body for the rest that the pipe provides becomes louder than the hunger of his stomach for rice. This is how the poison weaves itself into the fabric of the Qing dynasty, not through a grand invasion, but through a million tiny, private moments. It spreads through the tea houses, where the clink of porcelain is slowly replaced by the rhythmic bubbling of opium pipes. It spreads through the government offices, where junior officials find that the long hours of bureaucracy are more bearable if they take a little medicine in the afternoon. Even among the young, the curious sons of wealthy families, it becomes a trend, a way to show they are modern, sophisticated, and connected to the world beyond the Great Wall. They gather in private gardens, surrounded by blooming peonies and the song of nightingales, passing the pipe as if it were a rare vintage of wine. As you listen to the steady breath of the story, imagine the markets themselves beginning to shift. The flow of silver, which for centuries had been a one-way street into China, begins to stall. In the small exchange houses, the bankers notice that the heavy chests of silver coins are being moved out under the cover of night. The currency is being drained away to pay for the black cakes arriving on the British ships. The price of daily goods begins to creep upward, just a fraction at a time. A bowl of noodles costs a little more, a roll of cotton is slightly harder to find. The common people feel a vague, persistent pressure in their lives, a sense that things are becoming more difficult, though they cannot quite put their finger on why. The landscape remains beautiful, but the light seems to have changed. In the countryside, the villages still look the same from a distance. The water buffalo still wallow in the ponds, and the children still play in the dust. But if you look closer, you might see a father who stays in the house longer than he used to, his eyes unfocused. You might see a farm that isn't quite as tidy as it was last year, the weeds growing a little taller among the crops. The ancient structure of the family, where every member has a role and a responsibility, is starting to fray at the edges. The threads are being pulled, one, by an invisible hand. The British merchants, meanwhile, watch from their counting houses in Canton. They see the numbers on their ledgers turning from red to black. They see the demand for opium rising with a ferocity they had never imagined. To them, it is a triumph of commerce. They do not see the hollowed-out eyes of the laborer or the silver-drained pockets of the merchant. They see only the tea they can now buy in limitless quantities, the ships they can send back to London laden with the riches of the East. They feel they have finally unlocked the gate to China, not realizing that the gate they have opened is one that can never be closed. There is a young man, a student preparing for the imperial examinations. He has spent years memorizing the classics, his mind a treasury of ancient wisdom. He is the hope of his village, the one who will bring honor to his ancestors. But the pressure is immense, the expectations heavy as lead. One evening, a fellow student offers him a small pipe to calm his nerves for the night's study. The young man hesitates, then takes a breath. The words on the scrolls before him seem to dance and glow. The anxiety that has lived in his chest for years dissolves into a warm, golden mist. He feels brilliant, capable, and entirely at peace. He tells himself he will only use it tonight, just to get through this one chapter. But as the moon climbs higher in the sky, he finds he is no longer reading. He is simply staring at the candle flame, lost in a dream of a world where there are no exams, no duties, and no tomorrow. This quiet drift continues, season after season. The spring rains fall, the summer sun scorches the earth, and the autumn harvests come and go. On the surface, the Qing Empire still looks like the most powerful entity on earth. The Forbidden City remains a golden labyrinth of power, the emperor still receives the kowtow from his subjects. The silver moon hangs over the rooftops of Beijing, casting a pale, cold light on the tiles of the Forbidden City. Below that moon, across the vast stretches of the empire, the silence is no longer the silence of rest, but the silence of a deep, heavy languor. The shift has moved from the ports into the very heart of the homes. It is a slow turning of the wheel. Imagine a household in a prosperous provincial town. The father, a man who once spent his mornings practicing calligraphy and his afternoons overseeing his lands, now finds the light of the morning too bright. He stays behind his silken bed curtains until the sun is high in the sky. His children play in the courtyard, their laughter muted, as if they instinctively know that the master of the house is elsewhere, even when he is physically present. The neglect is not violent, it is a gradual fading, like a painting left in the sun. The garden path, once swept every morning, now hosts a few stray leaves that no one bothers to pick up. The ledgers on his desk remain closed for days at a time. His wife moves through the house with a quiet, heavy heart, noticing how her husband's voice has lost its resonance, becoming thin and airy, like the smoke he prizes above all else. She sees the fine porcelain vases being carried out of the house one by one, sold to pay for the small, dark canisters that arrive with increasing frequency. There are no arguments, just a weary acceptance that the man she knew is being replaced by a shadow who dreams of the clouds. This same shadow falls across the halls of government. In the local prefectures, the wheels of justice and administration begin to grind with a heavy, rusted slowness. An official sits at his mahogany desk, surrounded by stacks of petitions from farmers and merchants. He picks up a brush, but his hand feels heavy, the ink too thick. He thinks of the small, ornate box tucked away in his drawer. He tells himself he will handle the petitions after just one small pipe, to clear his mind, to find the focus he has lost. But the focus never returns. Instead, the petitions stay stacked, the dust settling on them like a fine gray snow. The order that held the empire together for centuries, the intricate web of responsibility and merit, is being unraveled by 1,000 tiny delays. In the fields, the pace of the harvest begins to stutter. The young men, the strength of the villages, find their ambition dampened. The back-breaking work of the paddies feels more grueling than it did for their fathers. They talk in low voices about the ease they find in the city dens, about how the world feels kinder when seen through a haze. The local markets, once vibrant with the sounds of bartering and the smell of fresh produce, feel thinner now. There is less silver moving between hands. Copper coins, the currency of the poor, become the main medium of exchange, and even those are becoming scarce as they are hoarded to pay for the foreign mud. The Qing government, far away in the north, begins to feel the tremors. It is not yet a roar of alarm, but a soft, persistent buzzing in the ear of the emperor. The Daoguang emperor, a man of simple tastes and a deep sense of duty, reads the memorials sent by his governors. They speak of a draining of the essence of the people. They report that the banners, the elite military units of the Qing, are no longer practicing their archery with the same vigor. The soldiers are found in their barracks, their bows unstrung, lost in the lethargy of the pipe. The silver is vanishing from the imperial treasury, flowing outward in a relentless stream to the British ships that wait, ever present, on the horizon. Imagine the emperor walking through the quiet gardens of the summer palace. He looks at the ancient pines, the stones that have stood for 1,000 years, and feels a strange, cold wind. He realizes that the enemy is not a marching army he can meet on a battlefield. It is not a rebel leader he can execute. It is an invisible, sweet-smelling mist that has entered the lungs of his people. He issues more decrees, his voice echoing through the vast, empty halls of the palace, but the decrees feel like paper fans trying to stop a mountain mist. The authority of the throne is still absolute in name, but in practice, it is being ignored by the desperate and the addicted. The emotional atmosphere of the country is changing. There is a sense of collective exhaustion. The vibrant, colorful festivals of the past feel a little more forced, the music a little less bright. People move through their lives as if they are walking underwater. In the city of Canton, the foreign merchants watch this with a detached, clinical interest. They see the physical decline of the people they trade with, but they look away, focusing instead on the glittering silver and the fragrant crates of tea. To them, the China trade has never been better. They write letters home to London and Liverpool, speaking of the great opportunities in the East, while just outside their windows, the society they are profiting from is quietly losing its will to stand. Even the scholars, the keepers of the empire's soul, are not immune. They find that the ancient texts, the works of Confucius and Mencius, seem distant and irrelevant compared to the immediate, blissful peace of the pipe. The high moral ground of the scholar-official class is being eroded. How can a man preach virtue to his village when he himself is slave to a dark resin? The hypocrisy creates a quiet, gnawing rot in the social fabric. Respect for authority, the very glue of the Qing dynasty, begins to weaken. People see their leaders stumbling, their eyes glassy, and they realize that the mandate of heaven is looking fragile. Yet, on a warm autumn evening, if you were to stand on a hill overlooking a major city, you would see nothing that suggests a collapse. The temples still glow with incense, the rivers are still full of boats, and the mountains remain as majestic as ever. The empire is still standing, its walls high and its gates imposing. But if you listen closely, past the sound of the wind in the bamboo, you can hear a different rhythm, a slow, shallow breathing. The heart of the great Qing is still beating, but it is the heartbeat of someone in a deep, troubled sleep. The strength is still there, in the stones and the history, but the spirit that animated those stones is flickering, like a lamp running out of oil. The realization begins to dawn on the few who are still awake. The empire hasn't fallen, but it has forgotten how to stand tall. The sun hangs low and heavy over the yellow-tiled roofs of the forbidden city, casting long, tired shadows across the vast courtyards. Within these walls, where time usually moves with the slow grace of a shifting glacier, a new kind of silence has taken root. It is not the silence of peace, but a silence of deep, furrowed concern. The high officials, men who have spent their lives mastering the delicate balance of an empire, move through the corridors with a gait that has grown heavier. They carry with them scrolls that seem to weigh more than they once did, filled with reports from every corner of the land. The ink on these pages tells a story of a great Qing that is slowly exhaling its strength into the air, a story of silver flowing out like lifeblood and a people growing pale and distant. Imagine the grand administrative halls where the air is cool and smells of old paper and cedar. There is no shouting here, no frantic energy. Instead, there is the soft, rhythmic click of abacus beads as clerks try to make sense of the disappearing treasury. They see the numbers shifting, the wealth of the nation slipping away into the pockets of the foreign traders at the coast. The emperor sits in his private study, the light of a single candle flickering against the dark wood of his desk. He is a man of immense responsibility, and he begins to realize that the bans and the edicts he issued from his throne are being swallowed by the smoke. The realization unfolds slowly, like a flower blooming in the dark, a quiet, somber understanding that the very foundation of his world is being softened. Among these officials, there is one man who begins to stand out, not because he is loud, but because his focus is as steady as a mountain stream. His name is Lin Zexu. Picture a man of middle age, with a face that reflects a lifetime of study and a heart that beats with a quiet, unyielding devotion to his country. He is not a man of sudden movements. When he speaks, his voice is calm and measured, like the tolling of a distant bell. He has spent years in the provinces, watching the effects of the foreign mud firsthand. He has seen the empty eyes of the scholars and the trembling hands of the soldiers. He sits in his garden at night, watching the moon, and he understands that this is not merely a matter of trade or silver. It is a matter of the soul. Lin Zexu begins to write. His brush moves across the paper with a deliberate, graceful strength. He writes letters to the emperor, not of anger, but of deep, reasoned observation. He speaks of the mothers who have no food for their children because the father has spent the family's coins on a pipe. He speaks of the walls of the cities that are falling into disrepair because the laborers are too weak to lift the stones. He describes the British merchants not as monsters, but as men who have forgotten their humanity in the pursuit of profit. His words are like stones dropped into a deep, still pond. The ripples are small at first, but they spread, touching every shore. The atmosphere in the government offices begins to change, drifting from a state of denial into a state of quiet preparation. There is a sense of weight, a feeling that a great decision is forming in the air. Messages travel slowly across the vast landscape, carried by riders who move through the mist-covered mountains and over the wide, flat plains. These messages carry warnings, gentle at first, like the first chill of autumn. Local governors are told to be more vigilant. Merchants are reminded of the laws. Small quantities of the drug are seized here and there, burned in quiet ceremonies where the smoke rises into the sky and disappears. It is a beginning, a soft stirring of a giant that has been asleep for a long time. In the coastal cities, the air feels thick with this new awareness. The British traders in their counting houses notice that the Chinese officials are a little less prone to bribery, their faces a little more stern. The trade continues, for the hunger is still there, but the ease of it is beginning to vanish. There is a quiet tension in the markets, a feeling that the rules of the game are about to change. The laborers still seek their pipes, and the silver still flows, but everyone can feel the shift in the wind. It is like the moment before a summer storm, when the leaves on the trees turn their silver undersides upward and the birds go silent, waiting for the first drop of rain. Commissioner Lin is eventually summoned to the capital. Imagine him traveling north, his carriage moving slowly along the dusty roads. He looks out at the landscape he loves, the terraced hills, the ancient bridges, the farmers working in the fields, and he feels the immense burden of what he must do. He is being sent to Canton with the power of the emperor behind him, tasked with stopping the tide. He does not go with an army, he goes with his brushes, his scrolls, and his unshakable belief in the rightness of his cause. He is a scholar warrior, a man who believes that reason and virtue can overcome the darkness of the pipe. As he approaches the south, the scale of the problem becomes even clearer. The smoke is everywhere. It drifts out of the windows of fine mansions and crawls along the floors of the poorest shacks. He sees it for what it is, a slow-motion catastrophe that has been allowed to fester in the dark. He spends his nights in quiet reflection, planning his first moves. There will be no violence yet, no sudden shocks. He will start with words. He will appeal to the hearts of his people and the conscience of the foreigners. He believes that if he can only show them the destruction they are causing, they will stop. It is a noble, quiet hope, born of a world that is already beginning to pass away. The administrative halls of Canton are prepared for his arrival. The floors are scrubbed, the scrolls are organized, and the officials wait with bated breath. There is a sense of gravity in the city, a feeling that the long, hazy dream of the last few decades is coming to an end. The people in the street sense it, too. They move with a bit more purpose, their conversations hushed. The British ships in the harbor seem to sit a little higher in the water, as if they are ready to flee or to fight. The tension is not a sharp thing, it is a dull, heavy ache that has settled over the coast. As night falls over China, the empire remains vast and beautiful, but the silence is now layered with anticipation. The lamps are still lit, the pipes are still smoked, and the silver still moves through the dark. But in a small room in a government compound, Commissioner Lin Zexu sits by a lamp, his shadow long against the wall. He is the one who is awake while the rest of the world sleeps. He is the one who sees the cliff edge that the empire is drifting toward. He feels the weight of the thousands of years of history behind him, and the uncertain, misty future ahead. The realization is complete, the time of drifting is over, and the time of the storm is drawing near, though for now. The carriage wheels crunch softly over the gravel as Commissioner Lin Zexu arrives in Canton. The air here is different from the crisp, scholarly silence of Beijing. It is heavy, humid, and thick with the scent of the sea and the faint, sweet ghost of poppy smoke. Lin does not emerge with a shout or a flourish of trumpets. He steps out slowly, his robes rustling like dry leaves, and looks toward the Pearl River where the foreign masts rise like a dead forest against the horizon. He is a man who carries the weight of an entire civilization in the steady line of his shoulders. He knows that the time for gentle warnings has passed, but he moves with the deliberate grace of a calligrapher beginning a masterwork. In the days that follow, a quiet gravity settles over the foreign factories. Lin issues his ultimatum, not with anger, but with a profound, somber clarity. He asks the foreign merchants to hand over their stores of opium, appealing to their shared humanity, asking them how they can sleep at night knowing the misery packed into every dark chest. The British traders, accustomed to the slow, predictable rhythms of bribery and look-the-other-way politics, find themselves faced with a silence they cannot buy. The administrative halls of the city become centers of a quiet, intense focus. Clerks move with hushed footsteps, their brushes scratching softly against yellowed paper as they inventory the surrender of the foreign mud. The confiscation begins. It is not a scene of chaos or clashing steel, it is a slow, almost ceremonial procession. Imagine the great wooden chests being carried from the warehouses. Each one is heavy, bound in iron and stained by the sea. They are moved by laborers who walk with a rhythmic, measured pace, their breathing the only sound in the humid afternoon. Thousands upon thousands of these chests are brought to the shores of Human. The onlookers stand in a vast, silent circle, merchants, soldiers, and common folk, watching as the physical manifestation of their country's shadow is gathered in one place. There is a sense of collective holding of breath, a feeling that the air itself is thick with the importance of the moment. Lin Zexu oversees the destruction of the opium with a meticulous, quiet dedication. He does not simply burn it, he understands that the smoke would only further intoxicate the air. Instead, he orders the construction of massive stone-lined pits near the water's edge. Imagine the scene at dawn. The sky is a pale, watery blue, and the mist is rising from the river. The laborers break open the chests, and the dark, sticky cakes are tossed into the pits. Then comes the salt and the lime. Water is channeled in, and the mixture begins to hiss and bubble, a slow, chemical dissolution. It is a cleansing, a deliberate undoing of years of decay. The process takes days. The sun rises and sets over the pits, and the moon watches the dark sludge turn to gray ash and foam. Lin himself stands on a wooden platform, his eyes reflecting the flickering torchlight at night and the harsh sun by day. He is not gloating, he is performing a funeral rite for a poison. The movement of the water, the shoveling of the lime, the steady flow of the tide as it eventually carries the neutralized remains out to the deep ocean, it all feels like a long, slow exhale. The empire is trying to breathe again. But while the pits bubble and the air begins to clear, a different kind of shadow is forming on the water. The British merchants, stripped of their immensely valuable cargo, stand on the decks of their ships, watching the smoke of the lime pits from a distance. They are quiet, but it is the quiet of a coiled spring. Among them is Charles Elliot, the British Superintendent of Trade. He watches the destruction of the opium not as a moral reckoning, but as an affront to the property and pride of the British Crown. To the merchants, those dark cakes were not a social ill, they were gold, and that gold is now being washed away into the South China Sea. The tension between the two worlds is no longer a hidden thing, but it remains, for now, a silent one. In the evenings, the British ships sit like dark ghosts on the water, their lanterns flickering in the breeze. On the shore, the Chinese guards pace the docks, their lanterns answering back. There is a strange, suspended quality to the time. The trade has stopped. The tea sits in the warehouses, unsought. The silk remains in its wrappings. The great machinery of commerce has ground to a halt, and in the silence left behind, the sound of the waves seems louder, more insistent. Lin Zexu writes a letter to Queen Victoria. His brush moves with a profound, gentle earnestness. He asks her, in words that are polite yet devastatingly direct, if she would allow such a poison to be sold in her own country. He speaks of the shared morality that should bind all rulers. He sends the letter across the sea, a small piece of paper entrusted to the vastness of the ocean, hoping that reason might yet prevail. He believes that the world is governed by a natural order, and that once the wrong has been seen, it must be righted. It is a scholar's hope, beautiful and fragile. In the administrative halls, the atmosphere is one of weary triumph mingled with a creeping, unnameable dread. The officials know they have done what was right, what was necessary to save the spirit of their people. They feel the weight of the emperor's approval. But they also see the way the foreign ships are gathering, the way the sailors look at them from across the water. It is a slow realization that by clearing the air of the opium smoke, they have also cleared the path for something much harder, much colder. The silver that had stopped flowing out is now replaced by a heavy, metallic silence. The people in the villages hear rumors of what has happened at Human. They talk of the great commissioner who stood up to the ocean devils. There is a flicker of pride, a momentary sharpening of the empire's dulled senses. But beneath that pride, there is the knowledge that the world is no longer the self-contained garden it once was. The walls have been breached, not by the drug this time, but by the consequence of refusing it. As the part ends, imagine the night falling over the coast. The lime pits are cool now, the stone surfaces wet with the evening dew. The ocean has taken the opium away, burying it in the deep, dark currents. Commissioner Lin retires to his quarters, his lamp burning low as he records the day's events in his journal. He feels he has done his duty to his ancestors and his emperor. But far out at sea, beyond the reach of his lamp, the British fleet is beginning to move, their sails catching the midnight wind. The moment of cleansing is over, and the moment of the great collision is silently, inevitably, drawing closer. The empire is awake, but the world it wakes to is one of iron and fire, waiting just beyond the mist. The night air over the Pearl River is thick and still, the kind of humidity that clings to the skin like a damp wool blanket. The lime pits at Human have long since cooled, their gray surfaces reflecting the silver of a distant, indifferent moon. But as the tides pull away from the shore, they seem to carry with them the last vestiges of the old world's certainty. Commissioner Lin Zexu sits in his study, the flame of his candle remarkably steady, yet the shadows on the wall seem to stretch and lean as if listening to the horizon. There is a new sound beginning to drift over the water, not the rhythmic splashing of oars or the familiar creak of merchant junks, but a low, metallic thrumming, a vibration that travels through the deep water and into the very stone of the docks. Far out at sea, beyond the sight of the coastal lookouts, the British response is no longer a matter of letters or ledgers. It has taken the form of iron and steam. Imagine these vessels, the Nemesis and her sisters, moving through the fog like prehistoric leviathans. They do not depend on the whims of the wind, they breathe black smoke into the pristine morning air, their paddles churning the glass-like surface of the sea into a frothing wake. To the villagers along the coast, who wake to see these dark silhouettes against the dawn, it is as if a dream has taken a solid, terrifying shape. There is no immediate thunder, no sudden clash of steel. There is only the sight of something profoundly unfamiliar, a mechanical power that does not belong to the seasons or the spirits of the ancestors. The First Opium War begins not with a roar, but with a series of quiet, devastating realizations. In the coastal towns of Dinghai and Chusan, the atmosphere is one of profound confusion. The local officials, dressed in their ceremonial silks, stand on the city walls and look out at the British fleet. They see ships that are not made of wood and matting, but of dark, cold iron. They see cannons that can reach across the water with a precision that feels like sorcery. The gap between the two worlds, the ancient, organic empire of the Qing and the industrial, driven power of Great Britain, is suddenly laid bare in the morning light. It is a gap measured in years of skipped innovation and centuries of self-contained pride. The conflict unfolds like a slow-moving shadow across a map. There are no descriptions tonight of the heat of battle or the cries of the fallen. Instead, we focus on the silence that follows the arrival of the fleet. Imagine a small fishing village nestled in a quiet cove. The fishermen have pulled their boats onto the sand, and the nets are drying in the sun. They watch from the hills as the giant ships glide past, their masts cutting the sky like knives. There is a sense of immense distance, not just in miles, but in understanding. The villagers do not know why these men have come from across the great ocean, or why the tea and the silk they have produced for generations have led to this moment of iron. They only know that the rhythm of their lives, the steady heartbeat of the coast, has been broken by a cold, external force. In the administrative halls of the southern provinces, the reports arrive with a heavy, leaden slowness. The messages are no longer about trade quotas or silver exchange, they speak of fire ships and unstoppable thunder. The governors and generals, men who were raised on the classics and the art of traditional warfare, find themselves paralyzed by a reality they cannot name. They move through their offices with a ghost-like frailty, their eyes fixed on maps that no longer seem to represent the world they live in. The weight of responsibility, once a proud mantle, now feels like a crushing stone. They realize that the great wall of their culture, the ideological barrier they believed would protect them forever, is as porous as the smoke from an opium pipe. The imbalance reveals itself in small, observational ways. A Chinese soldier looks at his matchlock musket, a weapon that requires a lit fuse and a steady hand, and then looks at the horizon where the British rifles can fire in the rain, with a speed and accuracy that defies his training. A merchant in Ningbo watches as his warehouse is requisitioned, not by his own government, but by foreign officers who speak a tongue that sounds like the crashing of surf. The hierarchy of the world has been turned upside down, and the people experience it as a dull, persistent ache, a feeling that the ground beneath their feet is no longer solid. As the British fleet moves up the coast toward the Yangtze, the heart of the empire, the sense of dread becomes a physical presence. The great river, the lifeblood of China, is no longer a safe haven. The iron ships move against the current with an ease that feels unnatural, their smoke staining the white clouds of the interior. In the tea houses that are still open, the conversations are hushed and circular. People ask if the emperor knows, if the gods are angry, if the foreign mud was a curse that has finally taken its true form. There is no anger yet, only a vast, collective sadness, a quiet mourning for a security that they didn't realize was so fragile. The young student we met before, the one who sought solace in the pipe, now sits by a window in a city under blockade. He no longer smokes, the supply has vanished, replaced by a cold, trembling sobriety. He looks at his books, the beautiful calligraphy of the sages, and they seem like relics from a drowned civilization. The wisdom of the past provides no shield against the iron of the present. He watches a single petal fall from a plum tree in the courtyard, drifting slowly through the air before landing in the dust. It is a small, quiet loss, mirroring the larger loss unfolding across the horizon. By the time the fleet reaches the gates of Nanking, the realization is complete. The Qing Empire, the Middle Kingdom, the center of the universe, is being asked to bow. Not to a superior culture, as they would define it, but to a superior machine. The negotiations that follow are conducted in hushed tones, in rooms where the air is thick with the scent of damp wool and old ink. The British demands are clear: more ports, more silver, and the legalization of the trade that started it all. The Chinese officials sign the papers with hands that do not shake, but their eyes are fixed on the floor, unable to meet the gaze of the men who have unmade their world. The part ends with the signing of the Treaty of Nanking, but we do not focus on the words or the politics. We focus on the atmosphere of the city as the sun sets. The great bells of the temples ring out, their sound carrying over the river, but the resonance feels different. It is a hollow, lonely sound. The empire is still there, the mountains are still high, and the rivers still flow to the sea. But something essential, something quiet and foundational, has been taken away. The sense of being the center of the world has evaporated like the morning mist. As the stars begin to appear, cold and distant, the people of China realize they are now. The ink on the Treaty of Nanking is dry now, and the great brushing of calligraphy across the heavy, cream-colored paper has left behind a silence that feels different from any silence the empire has known before. It is not the silence of a completed task or a peaceful night, it is the silence of a long, slow indrawn breath. The war has receded like a storm that has moved inland, leaving the coastal waters unnervingly calm. In the wake of the iron ships, the 5 ports, Canton, Amoy, Fuzhou, Ningbo, and the mudflats of Shanghai, begin to open their gates. To the people living in these cities, the change does not arrive as a sudden explosion, but as a series of subtle, rhythmic shifts in the texture of their daily lives. Imagine the city of Shanghai. Before this moment, it was a modest walled city, a place of salt flats, cotton fields, and the gentle swaying of bamboo in the river breeze. Now, slowly, very slowly, the landscape begins to transform. Strange, rectangular buildings of stone and brick rise along the muddy banks of the Huangpu River. These are the consulates and the hongs of the foreign merchants, their architecture stiff and alien against the curved, sweeping eaves of the traditional Chinese homes. There is no haste in this construction, it happens brick by brick, day by day, as the sounds of hammers and saws mingle with the ancient calls of the river boatmen. The morning mist still rolls in from the sea, but now it wraps itself around the tall masts of British tea clippers and the heavy smokestacks of steamships, creating a world where the old and the new are forced to breathe the same air. In the markets, the atmosphere is changing in ways that are hard to name. A merchant selling silk in a narrow alleyway looks up from his abacus to see a group of foreign sailors walking past. They move with a different energy, louder, more hurried, their boots striking the cobblestones with a heavy, metallic ring. He watches them with a quiet, detached curiosity. They bring with them things he has never seen, clocks that tick with a persistent, mechanical heartbeat, mirrors that are clearer than any polished bronze, and printed books with strange, angular characters. These objects begin to appear on the stalls, nestled between bundles of incense and jars of pickled ginger. It is a blending of worlds that feels almost dreamlike, as if a new layer of reality is being draped over the old one, but the two layers do not quite touch. The treaty has brought a fragile peace, but it has also brought back the shadow that Lin Zexu tried so hard to dispel. The opium is no longer a secret traded in the dark inlets. It is now a recognized part of the trade, flowing through the open ports with a cold, legal efficiency. The sweet, heavy scent returns to the streets, drifting through the open windows of the new buildings and the lattice work of the old ones. But this time, it feels different. It no longer feels like a foreign intrusion, it feels like a permanent resident, a quiet companion to the changing times. The people move through the streets with a sense of resignation, their shadows long and thin in the afternoon sun. They see the silver flowing out once more, and they see the pipes being lit in the tea houses, but the sense of alarm has been replaced by a weary, habitual acceptance. Ordinary people, the weavers, the porters, the grandmothers sitting on low stools in the courtyards, begin to notice that the world is no longer a closed circle. The Great Qing was once everything, now, it is merely one place among many. They hear stories of lands across the sea where the sun sets differently and the laws are written in iron. This realization is not a political one, it is an emotional one. It is the feeling of a house where the doors have been left open to a cold wind. The family is still inside, the tea is still hot, and the traditions are still observed, but the warmth of absolute security has vanished. They look at their children and wonder what kind of world they will inherit, a world that is becoming louder, faster, and more indifferent to the rhythms of the seasons. In the city of Canton, the old 13 factories are no longer the only place where the foreigners are confined. They move more freely now, their presence a constant, flickering movement at the edge of the eye. The Chinese officials move with a new kind of caution, their silk robes swishing softly as they navigate the complexities of these new relationships. They are no longer the absolute masters of the shore, they are negotiators, balancers of a scale that always seems to tip toward the sea. The halls of the yamen are quiet, filled with the scratching of pens and the hushed discussions of men who are trying to preserve the dignity of an empire while the foundations are shifting beneath them. The landscape of China remains vast and heartbreakingly beautiful. The Yangtze still flows with a majestic, unhurried power, the yellow lush plateaus of the north still glow in the evening light, and the terraced hills of the south still turn emerald green with the spring rains. The farmers still plow their fields with the same wooden plows their grandfathers used, and the scholars still find peace in the stroke of a brush. On the surface, the empire continues. The emperor still sits on the dragon throne, and the mandate of heaven is still spoken of in whispers of reverence. But something fundamental has shifted. It is like a bell that has been struck and continues to vibrate long after the sound has died away. The vibration is one of uncertainty. The people feel it in the way the price of rice fluctuates, in the way the soldiers carry themselves, and in the way the night sky seems a little darker, a little more vast. The sense of being at the center of the universe, the Middle Kingdom, has been replaced by a sense of being on the edge of something much larger and much less predictable. It is a slow, quiet transformation of the spirit. The pride is still there, but it is a pride that has been wounded, a pride that must now defend itself with words and treaties rather than with the sheer weight of its own existence. As you drift closer to sleep, imagine the cities of the coast as they appear from the deck of a departing ship. The lanterns of the Chinese quarters flicker with a warm, orange glow, while the gaslights of the foreign concessions burn with a steady, blue-white flame. The two lights shine together, reflected in the dark water of the harbor, but they do not mix. They are two different stories being told at the same time, in the same place. The empire is moving forward, but it is moving into a mist where the landmarks are unfamiliar and the stars are strange. The story of the opium and the war is not over. It has simply become the air that the empire breathes, a heavy, melancholic air that carries the scent of tea, the tang of salt, and the lingering, sweet smoke of a dream that has turned into a long, slow awakening. The empire is still standing, but the heart of it has grown quiet, listening to the sound of the world as it begins to change forever. The year turns, and then the year after that, and the rhythm of the Qing Empire becomes a slow, heavy pulse, like the tolling of a bronze bell underwater. The treaties are signed, the ports are open, and the foreign ships are now a permanent fixture of the horizon, but for the millions living within the inner provinces, the world feels as though it has simply slowed to a crawl. The opium, once a forbidden shadow, has become a quiet, domestic ghost. It has settled into the floorboards of the grandest mansions and the dirt floors of the humblest huts. It is no longer a crisis to be shouted about, it has become a routine, as regular and unremarkable as the morning tea or the evening meal. Imagine a room in the heart of a bustling city, yet within these walls, the bustle is a world away. The light is dim, filtered through paper screens that have turned the color of old honey. The air is still, heavy with a sweetness that never quite dissipates. A man lies on a low wooden couch, his head resting on a porcelain pillow that feels cool against his skin. Beside him, a small oil lamp flickers, its tiny flame a steady point of amber in the gloom. This is his world now. The movements are slow, practiced, and hypnotic. He takes a small silver needle, dips it into a dark, viscous resin, and holds it over the flame. The resin bubbles, a tiny, rhythmic sound, pop, sizzle, pop, as it transforms into a soft, malleable bead. He works the bead with a patient, meditative focus, rolling it, heating it, until it is ready for the pipe. There is no hurry. In this room, time does not move in hours or minutes, it moves in breaths and clouds of white vapor. When he finally draws the smoke into his lungs, the world outside, the taxes he owes, the roof that needs repair, the changing face of his country, simply ceases to matter. The edges of reality soften and melt. He is not falling, he is drifting, suspended in a warm, timeless ocean where every thought is a silken thread and every memory is a golden spark. Outside the door, his family moves with the same muted energy. His wife prepares a simple meal of rice and greens, her movements efficient but lacking the vibrant spark of years past. She does not complain, she simply carries the weight of the household on shoulders that have grown accustomed to the burden. The children play quietly in the corner, their games lacking the boisterous laughter of their cousins in the distant, untouched mountain villages. The house is a place of whispers and soft footsteps. The father is there, but he is also gone, his spirit wandering in the pale gardens of the pipe. This scene is repeated in 10,000 homes, a quiet dependency that has become the very fabric of daily life. As the sun moves across the sky, casting the shadow of the pagoda across the square, the stagnation becomes visible in the streets. The markets are still open, yes, but the energy is different. The merchants sit behind their stalls, their eyes often unfocused, waiting for customers who move with the same listless gait. Money changes hands, but it is a tired exchange. The silver is scarce, and the copper coins are worn thin. People do not talk of the future with the same bright-eyed ambition they once did. Instead, they talk of the price of the mud, of the quality of the latest shipment, of the small comforts that allow them to endure another day. The scholars, too, find their brushes heavier than before. In the quiet libraries, surrounded by the wisdom of 3,000 years, the ink dries on the stone before the poem can be finished. The grand ideas of statecraft and philosophy feel like heavy garments that no longer fit. They spend their afternoons in the gardens, watching the koi swim in circles in the dark ponds, their thoughts as circular and aimless as the fish. They are the keepers of a civilization, yet they feel like caretakers of a museum, polishing the artifacts of a glory that feels increasingly distant. The repetition of their days, the study, the pipe, the sleep, the study, creates a hypnotic loop that keeps the empire in a state of perpetual twilight. The government in Beijing continues to function, sending out scrolls and receiving reports, but the messages seem to travel through a layer of thick, invisible gauze. The officials who once dreamed of reform now find it easier to simply maintain the status quo. To change anything would require an energy they no longer possess. It is easier to let the tides come in and out, to let the silver flow where it will, and to keep the peace by remaining still. The empire is not collapsing in a heap of rubble, it is drifting, like a great, ornate ship that has lost its rudder and is slowly circling in a vast, calm sea. Even the architecture of the cities begins to reflect this quiet decline. The red lacquer on the pillars of the temples begins to flake, revealing the gray wood beneath. No one rushes to repaint them. The stone bridges, carved with intricate dragons and phoenixes, develop cracks where the moss takes hold, green and soft. The gardens grow wilder, the vines climbing the walls and choking the flowers, and the people find a strange beauty in this decay. It matches the internal landscape of their lives, a world that is fading, softening, and losing its sharp, defined borders. Day follows day, and the routine remains unbroken. The waking, the working just enough to sustain the habit, the gathering in the dim rooms as the shadows lengthen, and the long, dream-filled sleep. It is a hypnotic existence, a society-wide trance that numbs the pain of the recent war and the uncertainty of the coming years. There is a sense that the peak has been passed, and that the long descent is not a fall, but a slow, gentle glide. The individual stories blend into one another until they are indistinguishable. The tired laborer, the disillusioned official, the grieving widow, they all find a common language in the sweet smoke. It is the great equalizer, a shared secret that everyone knows and no one discusses. The empire is a body in repose, its breath shallow and steady, its eyes half closed against the glare of a world that is moving too fast. As the night deepens over the Middle Kingdom, the flickers of the opium lamps remain the only constant. They are the stars of a terrestrial galaxy, marking the places where people have sought refuge from a reality that has become too heavy to bear. The stagnation is absolute, yet it is peaceful in its own melancholy way. There is no fire here, no shouting, no struggle. There is only the soft bubbling of the pipes and the rustle of silk in the dark. The empire continues to exist, its borders marked on maps and its name spoken in foreign courts, but its essence is floating somewhere above the rooftops, lost in a cloud of white vapor that refuses to clear. You can almost feel the stillness yourself, the way the air seems to hold its breath, waiting for a tomorrow that looks exactly like today. The drift is all there is, a slow, hypnotic movement toward a horizon that never arrives, leaving the empire suspended in a beautiful, tragic, and permanent sleep. The years do not march forward now, they seem to seep into the earth like rainwater, slow and unhurried, leaving the world a little softer and a little more worn with every passing season. The Great Qing, once a vibrant tapestry of crimson and gold, is beginning to take on the muted, silvery tones of an old photograph left too long in the sun. It is a transition so gradual that if you were to stand in the center of a village square, you might not see the change from one day to the next. But if you were to close your eyes and listen to the pulse of the empire, you would hear that the rhythm has shifted. It is no longer the brisk, confident heartbeat of a lion, it is the slow, steady breath of an elder resting in the shade of a willow tree, watching the shadows grow long. The administration of this vast land, once an intricate clockwork of scholars and governors, is beginning to feel the weight of its own history. Imagine the grand halls of the provincial yamens, where the air is always cool and smells of cedar and old ink. The officials still arrive at dawn, their silk robes rustling softly against the stone floors. They still sit at their heavy desks, dipping their brushes into the dark wells of ink. But there is a quiet, pervasive lethargy in the way the brushes move. The petitions for new roads, the reports of failing dikes, the requests for grain during a lean harvest, they are handled with a weary, habitual grace rather than the sharp, decisive energy of the past. It is as if the ink itself has become thicker, more resistant to the page. The system is not breaking, it is simply slowing down, layer by layer, like a river nearing the sea. In the markets, the economy does not crash with a bang, it exhales. The silver that was once the pride of the treasury is now a rare guest. In its place, the heavy, brown copper coins circulate with a dull clinking sound. The people adapt to this new scarcity with a quiet, ingenious resignation. They repair what is broken rather than buying new, they stretch the rice with more water, they find ways to make the old traditions last just a little bit longer. There is no loud outcry in the streets, no frantic waving of arms. Instead, there is a collective, unspoken agreement to move more slowly, to expect less, and to find contentment in the small, unchanging details of life. The morning steam from a tea bowl, the sound of a neighbor's flute in the evening, the familiar sight of the sun setting behind the same jagged peaks, these are the anchors that hold them as the currents of the world grow stronger and stranger. The morale of the people is like a silk banner that has hung in the rain for too long. The colors are still there, but they have run together, and the fabric is thin. The deep, unshakable belief that their world is the only world, and that their way is the only way, has been replaced by a quiet, reflective melancholy. They look at the fading structures of their ancestors, the crumbling garden walls, the tilting pagodas, the temples where the incense smoke seems thinner than before, and they do not see a tragedy. They see the natural order of things. Everything that rises must eventually rest. They treat the decline of the dynasty not as a political failure, but as a season of the soul. It is the autumn of an empire, and like the leaves turning gold and brown, there is a somber beauty in the way things are letting go. Time passes in a way that feels almost hypnotic. The repetition of the seasons, the planting of the rice, the blooming of the lotus, the arrival of the winter frost, creates a sense of permanence that masks the underlying erosion. You see it in the way the great public works are neglected. A canal that once carried thousands of barges is allowed to silt up, the water moving more sluggishly every year until it is a chain of quiet, green pools where the dragonflies dance. A bridge that once stood as a masterpiece of engineering begins to lose its stones to the river, and the people simply walk more carefully over the gaps. It is a world of gentle adaptation, a society that is learning how to live within its own shrinking borders. The scholars in their libraries continue to study the ancient texts, but the words feel different now. They read of the great emperors of the Han and the Tang, of the strength and the brilliance of the past, and it feels like reading about a different planet. They do not try to recreate that glory, they simply cherish the memory of it. They write poetry about the mist on the mountains and the loneliness of the moon, their calligraphy becoming more delicate, more ethereal, as if they are trying to capture something that is already half vapor. They are the keepers of the flame, but they have accepted that the flame is burning low, casting long, flickering shadows across the scrolls. In the coastal cities, the foreign presence has become a permanent, if still slightly alien, part of the landscape. The people of Canton and Shanghai have learned to live in the shadow of the tall ships and the stone consulates. They move through the treaty ports with a quiet, observational distance. They take what is useful, the new medicines, the sturdier tools, but they keep their hearts tucked away in the old neighborhoods, behind the wooden gates and the spirit screens. They are witnesses to a transformation they cannot stop, so they choose to observe it with a calm, stoic patience. They are like stones in a river, the water flows over them, fast and cold, but the stones remain where they are, smoothed by the passage of time but unchanged in their essence. The realization begins to settle over the land, not as a sudden shock, but as a soft, evening mist that fills the valleys. The decline is no longer a temporary setback, it is not a crisis that will pass with the next moon. It has become the reality. It is the air they breathe and the ground they walk upon. There is a sense of being part of a long, slow closing of a chapter. The empire is still there, the maps still show its vast reach, the emperor still receives his guests in the forbidden city, and the laws are still read in the squares, but the spirit that animated the machine has begun to retreat inward. It is a society drifting, lost in a dream of its own past while the present flows around it like a rising tide. The opium is part of this drift, the sweet smoke a companion to the long, slow afternoon of the dynasty. It provides a cushion against the hard edges of the changing world, a way to stay within the garden just a little while longer. The dependency is no longer a scandal, it is a symptom of a world that is tired of struggling, a world that wants to close its eyes and listen to the wind in the pines. As you feel the weight of sleep pressing down on you, imagine the vastness of China at night. From the snowy peaks of the west to the humid shores of the east, millions of lamps are being extinguished. The empire is settling into its bed, wrapped in the heavy, silken robes of its history. The fading structures and the aging traditions are not disappearing, they are simply becoming part of the shadows.